All right, back to the presentation. So thank you so much for joining us from the West Coast, a different time zone. Kristina Chamorro is joining us from UC Berkeley Law Library, and she is a part of the reference team where she is the instructional and educational technology librarian, where she joined them in March of 2020, just a few weeks before they all had to leave the library. Before deciding to make the career change from working as an attorney to law librarianship, Kristina was a litigation associate at a mid-sized San Francisco firm where she enjoyed working on summer associate and attorney trainings as a co-chair of the firm's summer associate committee. Most recently, Kristina worked as a senior staff attorney at the California Court of Appeals, which was a wonderful experience for her, except for having to use the California style manual instead of the Bluebook when drafting her opinions. So thank you very much, Kristina, for joining us. And in addition, we also have Alena Wolotira, who is the head of public services at the University of Washington School of Law, Gallagher Law Library, where she's worked for 10 years. Alena holds an MLS with a special certificate in law librarianship from the University of Washington Information School and a JD from Gonzaga University School of Law. Alena has been a Bluebook nerd ever since she was a 2L on the Gonzaga Law Review, and serves as a law librarian liaison to the University of Washington's 4 student-edited journals. So we're going to be going over a couple of different things today. We have 45 minutes, and the first part of this program, Kristina is going to be talking about teaching the Bluebook. In the second part of the program, Alena is going to be talking about changes in the 21st edition of the Bluebook, and then we're going to follow that with some question and answer period. So I'm going to turn things over to Kristina now, make sure that we have everyone in the event. Let's see. Fantastic. So Kristina, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you now. Thanks.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here with you all today, and I apologize. There have been some trucks driving past my my window here, so hopefully you'll be able to hear me okay. But it is bright and early out here in California, so I've got my coffee and my Bluebook ready to roll. Oh, it's funny with these screen backgrounds, you can't really hold things up, but I do have my Bluebook. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about tips and strategies for Bluebook instruction. And as Brittany mentioned, I've had a couple of different roles. So my Bluebook journey began way back when as a law student, and then as a litigation attorney, where I worked with the Bluebook in my writing. And then one of my favorite parts was mentoring summer associates and new associates and helping them overcome some of their Bluebook anxiety and fears. And I'm now with the Berkeley Law Library, as Brittany mentioned. So I've had this just for about a year. So this is a new role for me. And it's been great to learn about instructional technology and tips from the perspective of an academic law librarian. So I understand we have a mix of both firm librarians and law librarians here. So I'm hopeful that the resources and tips I've pulled together will be helpful both in instruction for students and attorneys in overcoming their Bluebook anxiety. And so with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen. One moment. Let's see. Host is disabled. Participant screen sharing. Maybe I need to be co-host. That always gets tricky. Okay, I think it's going to work. There we go. Great, thank you. Okay. Super. Can everybody see that lead screen? Okay, great. Super, getting my screens arranged here. All right, so as Brittany said, in the next 15 or 20 minutes, I will be talking about instructional tips and resources. And I will put in the chat these slides after my presentation, and then as I understand it, Brittany will also be posting these. Great. So you don't have to take notes, and if there's anything that's of interest, I've included the links. So a roadmap of what I'll cover in these next 15 or 20 minutes. I'll just talk about some general tips for Bluebook instruction, some tips on teaching the nitty-gritty of the Bluebook that kind of have its own challenges. I've pulled together some Bluebook teaching ideas that I've come across this past year and that I've used, but as we all know, things change quickly, and the pandemic has presented, I think, some great opportunities for new ways of teaching the Bluebook. And oops, I see a typo here. And my Bluebook, some resources and tools. Oops. Okay. So we'll start with some general tips and strategies for Bluebook instruction as law librarians. And I really think this is all about whether it's summer associates, new attorneys, or students. It is all about demystifying the Bluebook. I think that can really help your audience get past that, especially if they're really new. Oh my God, how am I going to do this? Is just to take a deep breath in ways that you can help folks break it down a little bit. And I'm going to try to focus on the types of instruction we would do as law librarians, thinking more of, presentations and answering student questions as opposed to, developing a legal research and writing curriculum kind of a thing. But if you want more information on that, I'm certainly happy to pass that along. I have my email at the end of this, the slides. All right, so right off the bat, I think it's important when you're working with students or new attorneys, summer associates, to just acknowledge the Bluebook anxiety and discontent that's out there. I think we all know that few books cause as much dread and pain and frustration as the Bluebook. And I think it's just good to acknowledge these and reassure your audience, hey, you're not alone. And I think, there's that imposter syndrome out there. I think even more so maybe than when I started out as an attorney. And I think the Bluebook kind of has that secret handshake, secret club feeling to it. And I can think that can really stress students and new attorneys out. And in fact, I've used an opportunity being new to this role, to model when I get a question, I don't know, let's, I don't know that right off the bat. You could see me do that today with a question. And it's all about taking a deep breath and looking, knowing how to look things up. And I just think that's a really important part of the instruction rather than just jumping in with the nitty gritty. So a few things, that I find helpful in sharing. It's the Bluebook's a resource that practitioners, professors, judges, librarians, we all love to hate, that they're not alone, and, great deal of frustration and anxiety. Acknowledging that Bluebook rules can be very nitpicky, and that's just the way it is. And also I think it's important too. I remember as a new associate being, really, this is taking me forever to get these sites together, and just really acknowledge that, getting things in proper Bluebook form, especially as you're getting your sea legs, can often take more time than you expect. And that's okay. You just have to carve out the time, and little by little, it'll get easier. And then another strategy I think is great is, while acknowledging the bad news, pass along the good news and try to, again, really allay some of those fears and anxiety that I think especially with both students and new associates, I think they can hide. I think there's a feeling, again, with that sort of fixed mindset, I have to show that I know it all right off the bat. And that just, I think it's great to try to get students and new associates out of that fixed mindset and into more of a growth mindset about, hey, we're all learning this. It's a tool, and you can do it. And you don't have to pretend like you know it right off the bat. And again, in really emphasizing, even though it's sort of stated the obvious, that it's a reference tool. This isn't something that you need to memorize. If I sometimes want to use the example, if you can use a phone book, but then that makes me feel super old because students look at me like I'm crazy. But just again, really bringing it back to, this is a reference tool, and you just need to know how to use it. And I think it's helpful to remind your audience that they'll only, wind up using a fraction of the Bluebook. They're not going to have to flip through and know every page of it. And I mentioned having a growth mindset. I just think that's so important these days, is just, and especially with the Bluebook, because there is this sort of, it feels like a little bit like an elite club to be good at Bluebooking, is that it is something that you can learn, and with diligence, you can figure it out. It's not you're a Blue Book person or you're not, kind of a fixed mindset thing. And then another thing that I think is really important to emphasize, and I don't really get into the different citation manuals that are out there, but that after you learn the Blue Book, it's easier to adjust to other methods, that this likely won't be the only citation guide that you need to use, but it can make it easier. I remember when I went to the Court of Appeal, which was my last job before coming to Berkeley, I sat down and I was supposed to draft, do the first draft opinion. And I realized, and this isn't going to show up, I guess, well, maybe a little bit, this giant, it's not really showing, but it's a giant California style manual is what the courts use, and I thought, oh, I've been doing the Blue Book for all of these years. I started to get in that panic mode. And then I just reminded myself, what, it's like the Blue Book. This thing is huge. It's different. I haven't used it in many years, but it's just all about getting those skills to figure out and know how to use a reference manual like this. Okay, so another just tip that I think is helpful when you're talking to students or new associates is spend a few minutes explaining the why before diving into the specifics of the Blue Book. Why the Blue Book? It's just a fact of legal life. You don't have to believe that it's the greatest system and there's lots of critics of it, but it's just a fact of life, and and that you're going to have to learn it, but that there are pros with it. I don't know if anyone attended the Yale conference on legal citation. It was really good, and there were a lot of really great discussions about alternatives to the Blue Book and critiques, and I thought it was fascinating. But just that for now, it's far from perfect, but the uniform citation isn't going away anytime soon. And then I think another why can be important for students to have in mind is, why you're citing in the first place. And I think sometimes that can make citations make more sense rather than just blindly following the rules, that you're trying to properly credit the source, you're communicating the who, what, why, and where, and that citations should help your reader evaluate authority. And again, just kind of thinking about the reasons behind it can be helpful. This is just a quote that I think is good, sort of stating the obvious from the Blue Book. The central function of a legal citation is to allow the reader to efficiently locate the cited source. That's what we're trying to help students and attorneys do. And I think it's also helpful to remind folks that ambiguity is okay. I mean, it's not going to always be crystal clear. A certain rule might be kind of tricky. This caught my eye in an article, The Dreaded Blue Book by Mary Whistler, about she went through and looked at all the different ways that different law reviews cited the Blue Book itself, because it's sort of a unclear rule. Is it, well, it's editors who are the authors, it's, so she pointed out, look, Harvard and University of Pennsylvania Law Review had two different takes on it. The important thing is to just make sure, take a deep breath, do the best you can to understand the rules and to be consistent when you do it. I think that's really important. That just pick your lane, and that ambiguity is going to sometimes be there, and it's okay. All right, so those are just some general thoughts and tips. I have some thoughts on teaching the nitty-gritty of the Blue Book, and I know Alena is going to get into the nitty-gritty of the new edition, but a few thoughts on that. So I think helping your audience understand the layout of the Blue Book will make it a lot less intimidating. And we won't have time to get into all of this here. I'm keeping my eye on time, but what we all are probably very familiar with, what the blue pages are, the white pages, reminding students and attorneys the front and back cover are these great resources, and just trying to break it down a little bit before you just dive into, Rule X for citing cases, sort of a thing. And this is what some of us were talking about when we were entering in, encouraging students and attorneys to tab their Blue Books. I can't really show mine here since it's not showing up, but I was saying I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole. There's Pinterest boards on tabbing your Blue Books. There are, student videos of different systems. It's kind of cool. So that might be a fun thing to include in your instruction. This goes to the same line of thinking. When you do have to dive into the specifics, think about breaking it into manageable chunks. Sometimes you can't do that. You've got an hour to present, and it is what it is. I've got some ideas on a flipped classroom, but to the extent you can break it up, we're all getting more familiar with videos this past year of being remote, and it was beyond the scope of what I was doing today, but I'm totally happy to share with anyone. I went through a whole month analysis for Bluebook videos, actually, of what would be best, Camtura or Kaltura, recording in Zoom, all kinds of pros and cons. Totally happy to talk to anybody about that, about what Iway in our library, our Bluebook guru at Berkeley, and I found on that. But there are some great videos available too, not only videos you'd create yourself, but we're going to talk a little bit about law library research guides, including, I think probably Alena did some of these. The Gallagher Law Library Bluebook videos are great. Well, I know she did one on the new updates. Georgetown Law Library has great Bluebook video tutorials. Nice, they keep to that. Folks will say keeping when you're doing instructional videos to 5 minutes is a good rule. It doesn't always work when you're trying to do something for instruction, but Georgetown has good videos on that, which can be sometimes very helpful when I get questions from students or new associates. You can explain it and then give them, hey, if this still doesn't make sense, here's a video you can take a look at. And Harvard also has some terrific Bluebook videos that Jennifer Allison put together. And she looks at examples from published law review articles and goes through for an LLM class, but it's applicable to to general Bluebook tips. And with videos and things we've learned over this past year, flipping your Bluebook presentation can be an interesting way to do that, do things. For those of you who aren't familiar with that term, it's just flipping the classroom is the lecture portion are given to students or associates before your meeting, and then that frees up time for questions and examples during your set meeting time. And because Bluebook content is so dense, I think that can work really well. I had mentioned Iway Wong at our library. She each year does the Bluebook instruction for all the journals and is amazing at it. And it's usually an in-person kind of a thing. But this year, had to do things differently. And we worked together on creating videos on her above the line editing, below the line editing, again, breaking it into chunks. Not always 5 minutes, it just wasn't possible, but chunks, and then students can pause it, they can go back. And they would view that before, and then the time that she would have normally spent doing kind of what I'm doing here, it was reserved for questions. And one other great layer to that was that she allowed enough time for students to view the videos, look at questions or ask her questions, and then her slide presentation was based on what was most problematic or what they had for that particular set of articles they were reviewing. So I thought that worked really well. And she got great feedback on that. So I think flipping your Bluebook presentation can be a great strategy. And there's a good article from a little ways back that I've linked to here. I'm keeping my eye on time here. Other Bluebook teaching ideas, things like interactive exercises. I have a couple links here. That may be more for if you're teaching Bluebook with a legal research and writing program, but I think perhaps for the instruction you'd be doing, that can be helpful too. I noticed there were some good mentions of citation competitions and game shows in groups. The example, because you'd hate to make someone feel too on the spot. That kind of goes against all of what I'm saying of be open about what you don't know. But this Bluebook Madness, it's a little bit older, but it's a neat article. You might want to check it out, about a Bluebook game show that I thought was cool. All right, so I've just pulled together some Bluebook resources and tools. A lot of these you're probably familiar with, and it's certainly not everything for the purposes of what I was doing today, but I pulled together a few. Most of you are familiar with the Bluebook Online and that it requires a paid subscription. But I think, to the extent your attorneys or students have access to this, it's an amazing resource. But again, I think it's really important to make sure students understand, especially the younger folks who maybe think print is no longer needed, that it's really important, and it will be less overwhelming if you understand the print version before diving into the online version. And Alena may have some thoughts on that too, but it's also, when you're in a pinch, it can be a great way to look something up, get an answer quickly. I've mentioned online other law school guides. Here are just a few other guides that you might want to include in your presentation. I think it's great how I've noticed this so much more as an academic librarian, as a law librarian, or as a firm attorney. I wasn't really looking much beyond our firm resources, but people are it's such a great community of, sharing resources and working together. Berkeley Law Library doesn't have a specific Bluebook guide, but we, look to some of these other terrific guides when we're working with students. I mentioned a few, but here there are a ton of great guides, but here are a few, including Alena's. And then this is, I didn't want to go too off on a path on this because this could be its own whole presentation, but I think in your instruction, you would want to keep in mind some of these online citation generators and tools. The LibGuides are great about pointing some of these new things out, constantly changing, different for what some of the things I mentioned here are more geared towards students, but firms have all kinds of their own resources. But whatever it is that you're deciding to perhaps teach to your audience, it's just stating the obvious, but really emphasizing these are not a perfect solution and the output always needs to be double checked. I was just doing a Zotero presentation for an international legal research class, and the students were really frustrated when it wouldn't come out, exactly in Bluebook form, but it really does save a ton of time, but that emphasis that you still need to know the rules and check it. So I've just listed a couple here. The Westlaw and Lexis have the great copy with reference trick that you can, perhaps I'll put some links in here too. I don't have links to these, but you can Google those, and citation management tools are its whole own world, more for students. Some work better than others with the Bluebook. And I will just quickly note that I've got some books that help with the Bluebook here in the slides. Some of these you're probably familiar with, but I won't go through the specifics on these, but if you're interested, I've got the links here. And a few more. This Site Checker Guide has a new 2021 edition. I think that's a great one to know about. Prince's Dictionary of Legal Citations for all kinds of examples is really good. And then I couldn't do this presentation without mentioning the Indigo book. It's many are probably familiar with it, the open and compatible implementation of the Bluebook, focusing more on briefs, but with comments on journal style. I mean, this can be helpful if students or your associates are in a pinch, just to have something to look at, and it's available online. So I think that's something to be aware of. And that's it. I'm trying to stick to that time. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you all giving me this time. And if there are any questions on this or some of the things that I didn't go into in detail, feel free to email me. I'm happy to share, other resources.
Thank you very much, Christy. And I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but if you want to pop questions into the chat box as we're going along, I'll take a queue of them and we can go through those during the Q&A, in addition to any off-the-cuff questions that people have during that period of time. Thank you so much for going over some tips for teaching. There are some new things that I'm going to incorporate into my trainings, so thank you very much. I am taking back the host capabilities, and I am going to transfer it over to Alena now. Make host. All right, Alena, you should now be set to talk about some of the changes.
Cool, thank you. And thank you, Christy. I also learned lots of good things. So it's just wonderful to be in a community of people who like the Bluebook and like teaching. Hi everyone. My name is Alena Wolotira, she, her. I'm the head of public services at the Gallagher Law Library. So today I'm going to talk about major changes in the 21st edition of the Bluebook, which was published last summer. And I will be sharing these slides with Brittany. They're very text heavy because I wanted to be sure to include the text of the changes. So just know you don't have to, you'll get them later. Don't get overwhelmed. So first of all, the 21st edition of the Bluebook is substantially similar to past editions. And a lot of the edits that happened in this edition are actually really helpful. They either simplify things that were kind of overly complicated or confusing. They make some clarifications, and then there are a couple of additional rules that that add a way to cite some really niche documents that I'm sure, were confusing to some people. Moving to my next slide. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my method. It's very technical. When I get a new edition of the Bluebook, I take the old edition and I get out a highlighter and I just go through every single sentence like a total weirdo, and I highlight every single possible change. So if you really want to know the real nitty gritty, like the super fine details, the new examples, etc., like I'm happy to share that information with you. I did not think it would be a good use of everyone's time to talk about that today, but I'm happy to share it. I also have this YouTube video that I made for our journal students last summer, just to cover the major changes to the white pages. So I also am going to cover the blue pages here. And as a refresher, the blue pages are for practitioners, for legal memoranda or documents filed with the court. And then the white pages are for academic writing. So let's get started. The first one, blue pages B6, abbreviations, numerals, and symbols. So the gist of this change is that it's now okay for writers to shorten the names of reporters and their citations in order to save valuable space. Pretty simple. This one is B8. The title of this is capitalization, but I'm not sure if it's like a typo or if I'm just missing the context. But this change actually seems to have more to do with the previous rule than with capitalization. And it basically just says that you're not supposed to abbreviate the titles of court documents in the text of your brief. So if you've filed other documents, you should be referring to them in full in your textual sentences. Next, we have B12. This is the last of the blue pages changes, and it mirrors the changes to Rule 12, which I'm going to cover in a second. So on to the white pages. This is a great one. So the first major white pages change is in 1.4, the structure and use of citations, the order of authorities within each signal. So in previous editions, this was kind of complicated. There was a very, very granular list of the order in which you should cite different types of authorities in your citation sentence. And in my opinion, it was pretty confusing and a little tedious. And I think, talking to our journal students, authors did not tend to follow this rule when they were submitting things. So it took a lot of time on the journal editor end to get everything in the proper order. So the new rule is that authorities should be ordered in a logical manner. That is just so easy. And I think it's going to then mean that, there is some utility to being able to control the order in which you cite authorities when you're, stylistically, I think that adds some depth to your citations. Okay, the next big change is Rule 10, in chambers opinions. So the past editions of the Bluebook actually did not have a rule for in chambers opinions, and these are opinions that are when one U.S. Supreme Court justice has the authority to make decisions on stays, bail, injunctions, they write an in-chambers opinion on behalf of the whole court. And these are often, not published anywhere, but it's sort of interesting. So this rule actually not only tells you how to cite things, but it also tells you where to find them. Which is handy, from a librarian's perspective. So it lets you know that Cynthia Rapp wrote a book called In Chambers Opinions of the Justices of the Supreme Court of the United States. From 1969 on, the US Reports has in chambers opinion citations, but if you're looking for anything before then Ms. Rapp's book is your source, so pretty cool. The next one. So this one is actually my favorite change in the 21st edition of the Bluebook, and I'm guessing most of you have already heard about it. It's big news. The old rule for statutes, when you were citing to the US Code, required you to cite to the latest official print volume of the US Code, which was printed by the government printing office, still is, and was only printed once every 6 years. And as librarians, we know oftentimes, we didn't get them for a year or two after they were officially printed. So this was really challenging from a training student's perspective to refer them to this book that they did not ever use otherwise, because they're looking at things online or even looking at the annotated codes in print. So with the 21st edition, the Bluebook has now done away with the year requirement for US code citations. So you still have to obviously check that your cited statute is up to date by looking at a reputable source. But this makes it way, way easier for journal editors and scholars to just cite to the US code. And then just a caveat, this does not change your citation year for state codes. That stays the same. All right, clarity on dates for amendments to statutes. This is if you are citing to a statute section that has been amended, and you're citing to a subsection of that section that hasn't actually been impacted by the amendment, you still need to include the amendment year in your citation. Another simplification, clarity on when you use the names of multiple authors versus when you use et al. So the old rule was kind of confusing because it was really permissive, and in a book that provides a lot of clarity and black and white rules, I think students were pretty confused by what they were supposed to do here. So now they just say, they're just a little bit more specific. So use the author's name followed by et al. When saving space is desired and in short form citations, and then otherwise you list all of the author names when you think that's particularly relevant. Okay, there were a bunch of changes to the internet rule, Rule 18, which isn't surprising because it's been kind of, it's just in flux and evolving as, legal research and legal citation evolve to accommodate electronic resources. So this particular update, date and time for updated online materials. So this comes into play when you're citing to like a blog post or a news article that's been updated since it was originally published online. So the 21st edition says that you should be using the date that the piece was updated rather than the original publication date in your citation. This one is about short links. So the Bluebook is now accommodating short links in your citation sentence, as long as the short link indicates the source of the citation. Bit.ly was an example that they used that would not suffice because it doesn't tell you where you got the thing, and thereby it doesn't imbue any authority into your citation. Okay. So this is 18.6 and 18.7. We didn't used to have a rule for putting time markers in video and audio recordings, and now we do. Take a look at that if you're interested. And we also now have a rule for how to cite photos and illustrations, which is helpful. Okay, now we're out of the white pages and onto the tables. So T2, foreign jurisdictions, was a big chunk of the tables section of the 20th edition and previous editions, and now it's all moved online. I think this is really great. This part of the Bluebook Online is free, so you don't have to have a subscription to be able to access it. I think it just gives, it means that they can go into a tiny bit more detail without worrying about taking up print space. So that's good, because as we know, foreign jurisdictions are complicated and there's lots of stuff that comes out of them. Okay, and then this is another big change. So T13 in previous editions was a list of common words in periodical titles. So the 21st edition eliminates that, and then combines the content that was previously in T13.2 with stuff that's in T6, which is common abbreviations in case names and institutional authors. So now there's one abbreviation, table to rule them all. This is helpful. So in the old rule, there were some words that had a different abbreviation depending on the context, which I think really, really confused students or people who were, kind of new to Bluebook citation. I mean, honestly, that's not true. They confused me. I would always have to double check, if I was supposed to do univ or u. And then another issue with the old tables was that we had the same abbreviation for multiple words. An example would be like register and regulation were both reg. So now the new T6 contains unique abbreviations for all common words in case names, institutional authors, and periodical titles. So you don't have to consult two of those. And then here is a list of all of the new abbreviations from T6. I went through and just highlighted the new abbreviations compared to the previous edition. And you'll be happy to note that laboratory now has an abbreviation, and it is labby, which I think is very cute. But a few of these other ones they just sort of made it more clear. And there were some changes to the way that we've generally been doing it in past editions, so that just take a look the next time you've got a big blue booking project. And finally, so I just wanted to note in periodical titles, so we've got these changes to T6 and T13, but the Bluebook editors made sure to include this little caveat. So for periodical titles only, the rules in this paragraph, which is this group of words together, apply. So abbreviate university as U, and also omit words a, at, in, of, and the, but retain the word on. Furthermore, if the title consists of only one word, after the words a, in, of, and the have been omitted, do not abbreviate the remaining word. Okay, so this is helpful because it means that the way that we've always been formatting our citations to law journals isn't going to change. So, Hein doesn't have to update their citation tool. Lexis and Westlaw don't have to. These stay the same. So the University of Chicago Law Review stays the same. U-SHI-L Rev. All right. So that's it. So if you ever have questions, if you want to talk nerdy blue book stuff, please shoot me an email. I am happy to talk to you. And I think now it's time for questions from everyone.
Oh, you're muted.
Yeah.
Yep. Always forget to do that. So thank you very much, Alena. That was fantastic. And I had my highlighter out as you're going. And it's so funny because I always know that looking at the preface to the new edition really does help you realize all the changes that had been made. But for some reason, I had totally forgotten to look at the preface until you actually started speaking. And I was like, to refresh our memories. Okay, but just a few housekeeping things. I will be sharing the materials that Christy and Alena are making available to everyone. And that will also include the link to Alena's video on the more robust changes that have happened in the 21st edition of the Blue Book. And now I'm going to start us off by asking the questions that were asked during the presentations, and then if anyone else has any questions, we have a little bit of time for more questions. The first question was, oh, and I actually deleted the first question, so let me grab it.
Was it maybe the online version?
Yeah, do you find using the online version easier or harder than the print copy of the Blue Book?
And I'm the one who asked that question, so it could also be open up to the entire audience. I would love to hear their input, and so the onus is not on our speakers who have done a fabulous job. Thank you.
I would say I use both. I use both. I mean, the online version is easier to search, which is great. But I find the print version easier when you're trying to get to the bottom of what this actually means. Cognitively, I work better with print. I think our students have been very happy to have the online version because they're used to being able to Control F and search. But I'd love to hear what other people think.
Well, and I would agree that it's so great when you have a specific question to search, but then I think it is also great, especially if it's a new concept, that whole, mapping of, just like for the same reason that sometimes the index in a hard copy resource in a print is better, that you can get context and you can, you might not always be asking the right question, right? And so the surrounding, and you can do that online too, but I find it a little easier in print. And the one other thing I'll say is now in this Zoom world, and we'll see how it continues, at least with students, sometimes it's nice having the online version to be able to screen share, right? And go through and has great, you can pull up the great examples of the parts of the citation as opposed to trying to hold up your blue book. And so that's a plus I found with the online.
I also like to be able to have my finger in the index and my finger in the rule. Our next question is, has anyone tried Perfect It or anything like it? It's a Word add-in that can provide Bluebook citation checking.
Not I.
Me neither.
I can imagine like they would try to come up with some technology that just would upload your brief and just tell you you've done it wrong correctly. That's all. I just
every time I try something like that, it just seems like it's not right enough, but I would be interested if anybody, students are always looking for something, something that will get you mostly there. So I'd be interested. And
I think we're getting close to that. Yeah. Well, and it seems, I know there was a Bluebook presentation when I first started that Iwe did, and she touched on Draft Analyzer, and as a way when you're checking that, because it has some Bluebook functionality, she hadn't really spent a lot of time with it yet. And I noticed I was also talking to the legal technology assessment platform folks by Procertas. I don't know if anyone uses that. So both in school and firms, they said they're developing a Bluebook module. Right now it's more Word, Excel. So I thought that was really interesting. So it just does seem like that's on the horizon. I don't think it'll ever be perfect, but I think just like a brief analyzer isn't going to do your work for you, it can save some time for that baseline stuff. So at least you haven't, a printout that you can check. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah, we use a drafting assistant, which is a Thomson Reuters product.
Right. And how does that work? How are you finding that?
I think it's similar to like the copy with reference, where it gets you maybe most of the way there, but they also say you can choose your jurisdiction and it'll follow the court rules. And I really don't know how well that at my firm, in the library, we don't do the blue booking. So I don't know how well that whole process works.
Right.
But it's better than, it's better than nothing, and it does work in Word. So you're able to make changes really easily and have it all assessed at once.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and we had one final question. And this is about the reference books, so the books to help you understand the Blue Book. Most of the books focus on the blue pages. We follow the white pages. Have you found any books that focus on the white ones?
That's a great question. I think it was Judith. Did you ask? Yeah, and I don't know offhand. Yes. I'm going to, look for you, and I'm happy to email you.
Alena, I'm here in Israel, so.
Okay.
You can just catch me on by email.
Okay, yeah, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I'm happy to look into that for you.
Thank you.
And I think we might have time for one more question if anyone else has any. Otherwise, I would love for everyone to turn on your camera so I can do a quick picture of everyone in attendance.
Oh, I know. Holding up the blue books. I wish mine would look.
Oh, yes. I'm going to hold mine up.
Kind of.
All right, everyone, smile. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. So now I just wanted to say thank you so much to Kristy and Alena for your time and effort in sharing your expertise on the Blue Book. And I really appreciate you spending your morning over on the West Coast with us on the East Coast. So thank you so much. And I'm gonna go ahead and
My pleasure.
do my
Yeah, I really
my
enjoyed it.
clapping.
It's so nice to, yeah, really enjoyed it.
All right, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Take care,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Have a good
you.
afternoon.
Bye.
This was great. Thanks so much.
And
You're
thank
welcome.
you. Take care all. Be safe.
So I didn't, oh wait, let me stop recording.